All right, thanks everybody for joining. Today we're going to continue our discussions on OpenC2 and OCA and the mapping of those things together. I do appreciate a lot of good discussions that I saw in the email. And we'll talk a little bit about that discussion in this call. If you remember our little, hold on a second, go away. Okay, good. So remember we're talking about this particular picture. I did take a chop at it again with some great counseling from people that know better than me about OpenC2, and did the mapping. Hopefully you guys saw. Let me get this up here for you. This mapping I made. I know Dave Kemp, you sent me some stuff we're going to talk about as well. But I did go down through the OpenC2 specs. I did have some help to find some of the actuator profiles that existed. I used the EDR one since we were talking about endpoints, so that was helpful. So I was pointed the right direction in GitHub to find that, so that's good. I started with this. Hopefully you can see this, the screen, the presentation I sent out. I think David, you requested I put action and targets on things, so I went off and did that. So we had a good listing, if you will, of the actions that we want to take in the OCA architecture. Again, I didn't do it. I stopped on the pace stuff. I left that to the side because I kind of feel that pace will resolve itself because it's going down the OpenC2 path. And I assume that they'll deal with all this, and where it's appropriate with their posture collection and their verbs that they got to have there, they'll map it all out and we'll just inherit it. I don't think there's anything we'd add value on that anyway. So I did stop at that. I did do all the others that I could think of that were in that picture I just showed you. But as I said, I did kind of map them to the action targets that I think, David, you were asking me for to help get closer to the way specification works. I did want to point out one clarification on the query device. It's kind of generic, but there is a lot of querying that goes on in those flows. A lot of it I know we use via sticks and stick shifter. So, we may have to figure out how do we build a linkage between OpenC2 and stick shifter, because there's a lot of queries that I know we drive for all the analysis we do with the Simmons SOAR to grab. Mostly it's device characteristics, it's IP addresses, it could be MAC addresses, it could be usernames, that kind of stuff. So there's a whole list of things. So I didn't want to get specific on query device. We'll get to it later, but there's a raft of things that'll leverage, I think, the stick shifter work to enable us to do some threat hunting by looking at some of the attributes in the device. And it's all interactive, kind of operator driven. It's not programmatic, but anyway, I left that a little more general than the others. And I didn't mess with the open incident response case. I think that's just a special flow between, to a SOAR. We'll architect that later. I thought I'd just focus on more the endpoint stuff. So I potentially didn't make that action target at this point. I will get there, but I thought let's just start with the endpoint and kind of go backwards. Okay.
So Russ, first of all, I want to thank you for doing all this. It was funny. There was actually we were talking before about All Things Open. There was actually a talk at All Things Open where they stressed that it was to get people to do more open source, but they stressed that beginners bring a value also. And the fact that you could look at our stuff with fresh eyes, you saw stuff that we didn't notice that we need to clean up.
Oh yeah.
So we really appreciate you doing this.
Oh, no problem. No problem. And I always like learning new things. So I always find that it humbles me. So that I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody's help because I'm an amateur on this, and I've openly admitted I'm an amateur, and I'm happy to be lectured on what I'm not doing right. So,
but remember that the am part of amateur is love, so you're doing the right thing.
Thanks, Doug. So that's the first one I did. Then I did, this one, is some other actions that we'd identified previously. And I think David Lehmeyer, you helped me with this last time. I didn't touch this as much. I think it was in better shape, to be honest with you, than the other one. But anyway, I did that. So, we have these mappings that go kind of to the endpoint from all the different things we had in our diagram. I pulled this out of the actuator profile, out of the spec, which really helped me because I didn't know where this was, and then I found it. So that's awesome. So this helped me understand a little bit about some of the differences that I was struggling with, because it's always, with syntax and words, it's nice to read a little bit beyond just the word allow or the word contain or the word deny. So this was very helpful. So I pulled this in just so I had it as a reference point. Then what I did here, which I think is interesting, is I mapped what I think we need in OCA and what I know of existing in OpenC2. And the yellow is where OCA fits. And if there's blanks there, I think that's where we got to do some work with OpenC2 to put in what we OCA think need to extend what they've already got. So I did try and map the two together, based on the information I have from the spec and the information I have from our charts. So let me just take a second here to just show you that that's just the matrix here is just what's supported by the EDR, the EDR profile today, and then in the yellow I indicated where we're going to be using it in OCA. And they said there was some whites here where it's just blank. They're completely blank at this point. Part of maybe my ignorance. And then over here on the side, what I did is I put in what I thought was missing. There's a query device missing, a block URL we'll talk about, and the scan files. And I did get some comments, I think, from David on these bunch, but that was helpful also. Just trying to delta out what I think OCA needs versus what OpenC2 currently has and where we think we need some additions.
So are the missing over on the side, they're missing from the EDR command target matrix, or they're missing from OCA?
They're missing from the command target matrix. OCA needs these things on the side. These came in these three things as an example were in our OCA architecture. But when I went to go find where the mapping would be, or in the currently defined actuator profile for EDR, it wasn't there.
You've got a blank circle on deny process, but it's not in your list. I'm trying to get the disconnects there.
Deny process.
That one.
Yeah, this one was, I think, when you find a malware and you want to stop it from running, is that a deny? I mean, you don't want it to start up again, i.e. you're blocking.
I guess what we're asking is, I'm trying to correlate the circles with the list on the side. Like query device is a blank circle.
Yeah.
I mean, I look in the matrix, I see where query meets device, and there's a circle there, and you have it over on the side. Then block URL isn't a circle anywhere. Well, it'd be under deny, but we don't happen to have URL in the target list.
Exactly. That's what happened. That's right. That's why I mapped it.
So if you put URL as a new role,
Yep.
a row, then under deny URL would be a blank circle.
Yeah.
And then similarly, scan files. Files is a list on the side, but scan is not a column at the top. So there's a missing.
Yeah, it's not. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's not consistent. But these are the things that, as you mentioned, that if you tried to find these in the current EDR actuator, they wouldn't be there.
So
Russ, I'd like to, second Duncan's thanks for putting a new set of eyes on this, because the existing EDR profile was pretty much the work of one guy, and we did not have a lot of interaction there. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that is moving us forward. So yes, all of this feedback is valuable in moving it from a 0.01 maturity draft to a 0.02. So yeah, this is great.
Super. And I completely agree with him. Anytime I do this kind of stuff, it's good to get
this chart. It's like really good. I think we should carry it back to the OC2 group. But one improvement I'd suggest, just as a newbie trying to read it, and now I understand what I didn't understand before. Yep. I think it might be easier for us if you put a new row in that had URL at the bottom, and you literally put your OCA yellow circle around the header of the row where it said
got it.
URL.
Got
and
it.
Similarly, put a new row in, a new column in that says scan, and put a circle around that. And then you could put the three circles that are missing in. You could put the three circle at the intersection of the URL row with deny, the intersection at the column. And then I think it'd be less confusing, at least to us over on the open.
I agree. I was inconsistent. I could see why everybody's confused. I'll be happy to do that, Duncan. It makes a lot of sense. So,
can I make a further suggestion?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So if you added rows for the missing targets and columns for the missing actions, you could then do a kind of traffic light protocol markup where if OpenC2's got it covered, the circle's green, If you have one of the action or target, but not both, the circle's yellow. And if neither of them exist, then you'd have a red circle.
Oh, I could do that. Yeah, I didn't put all the greens here. I tried to do that with the valid yellows, but those would probably be greens in what you just described, David. So I can certainly change the colors to reflect on we're covered and we're going to use it.
Just a thought
Yeah.
for how the graphic could immediately draw your eyes to work needed here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess it would also be useful, because all said and done, the valids that don't have OCA on them are also probably need to be looked at, because there's the OCA use case and there's the use case that was used to make the original EDR profile. So obviously it was a different use case.
Absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
might be doing something with EDR that OCA isn't, that might be worth looking at. Well, maybe it should be. And vice versa. They probably should be looking at, well, maybe I need this other one too. Because they had a lot more valids than they have a lot of things you don't need. So I guess I'd want to understand why they needed them and you don't.
And Duncan, I may need them and not know it too. So that's also a possibility.
One thing that
So yeah,
I'd like to
certainly I
add
think part of
is,
it's also the, yeah.
oh, I was just going to say, if we're going to add additional rows to this, like URL, probably be a good idea to add domain as well.
Domain.
Since denying that resolution would be at a different stage than the URL.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you think
your
that's a relevant- you think
URI
that's-
versus domain, and whether they're three different or three gradations of the same. Yeah, we'd have to get into all that.
So for that
Yeah,
comment,
that's good,
Andrew,
but go ahead, sorry.
yeah, I said for that comment, Andrew, I'll need your help in making sure we have domain back in our OCA picture, because it's not there, and I want to make sure they're always mapped. We're consistent.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this from, admittedly, like the tip perspective, that these are different entities, but then also how they get enforced tends to be very different, because one's going to happen at the DNS resolution phase, which is normally hooked into the operating system.
Right.
Yeah, I want to ask that just to make sure that in any of the three, URL, URI, or domain, that the EDR function is the function to do it. Because we get into this, there's a semantic issue that we have not resolved over in OpenC2 of sort of how granular do you make your functions?
Absolutely.
If you make them too granular, there's like too many overlaps and intersections, and you need 17 of them and everything else. But on the flip side, if you lump too many together, you get this, yeah, but that doesn't apply to me. In actual, like, real life hardware, once you get into it, you actually, blocking a URL usually means blocking a domain name lookup, as opposed to meaning block the IP associated with the URL, which is a different issue. So we might have to get into that.
I would argue that that's not the case, as if you have multiple requests to the same domain, but with different URLs, which, you think, like, you go to CNN.com and
I don't know.
URL
URL versus domain, I agree. I'm just saying the blocking the DNS request or changing the answer back from a DNS request is, if you're sandboxing it, is a different function than blocking the IP associated with the URL. And so if in an EDR, if the EDR itself is doing the lookup, then yes, you can just do it as block URL. But if the EDR itself is not doing the lookup, and I don't know EDR well enough, so if something outside the EDR is doing the lookup, then you need to do the block on the IP that got responded, which is actually a different function. I don't know if that made any sense.
Don't disagree there. I guess my only concern is the case where you've got serial queries going on. Sometimes you got to block, like, once you start getting requests to the domain, and then you realize later, oh, but wait, this one's bad.
Yeah, no, I agree. You have to block at every level of granularity.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I was just trying to do the pre-lookup, post-lookup distinction.
Sure. Yeah, and like I said, my experience mostly is on the controls on the other side. So I'm like, you know, generally once you have to make the decision as early as possible, because once somebody already has the resolution, the cat's out of the bag, and it doesn't
Right.
matter if you want to block the URL later.
Right, because it's already in your cache, but that's when you're going to be blocking the IPs anyways, hopefully.
Exactly.
Back to you, Russ.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for the comments, guys. And so the other comment I want to discuss a little bit about, and this is kind of interesting in the weirdness of what we're doing, and I don't know if it even maps to OpenC2, but the example of scan files where there's a single action that's going to, and this is a typical malware use case, right? I'm scanning the file system looking for bad, or I'm just doing a normal scan to, as you do, on your endpoints every once in a while to check what's out there. I don't know if that kind of multiple action thing, is that appropriate for OpenC2, or is that, so we consider that, outside the domain of OpenC2? I just wanted to ask that question.
That's appropriate. That's just a collection. It's just like, IP address, single IP address, or a whole bunch of them, or whatever. That's just a multiplicity on. Now, when you say scan files, are you saying scan all the files? Are you saying here's a list of 12 files to scan? Is it a list, a star, or a something else?
Well, traditionally with malware, right, you have a list of files you're looking for when you scan, and you're comparing it against what you found traditionally.
Yeah, so it is a list of files.
Yes.
that you provide.
Yeah. So that, and it's a compound, and I think we'll run into those where there's a few things that we're going to run into in OCA where I think we're going to do this on the threat side too, right, Andrew? When I go ask for known zero-day threats, there's a list that I get back.
Well, the to-date sort of rules on OpenC2, and again, we're driven by use cases, so we can change if need be, but I don't think this would change it. Traditionally, so far at least, a multiplicity of a single target still can be done in a single command. But if you want to do more than one command, you have to do them as two different commands. So you can't say scan files and block file or something.
Gotcha.
I don't
Okay,
know.
but I can scan files and then block, right?
Yeah,
And scan files will do multiple files, not just one, right?
correct. We
Okay.
have to check whether we have a target for that at the moment. We might
No,
not.
that's okay. I just want to make sure I was in the bounds of what OpenC2 is, because I think, as you've seen some of the OCA stuff, it's just not in the bounds of OpenC2, and that's a fair answer. I just want to make sure I'm not.
Yeah, no, it's similar to IP addresses, which we spent
Yeah.
weeks arguing about and ended up with, of course we can do multiple.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Okay. Any other comments on this chart? I'm gonna switch off of that, and I'm gonna go to I think I'll go to David. You sent me a nice markup I wanted to go through with the group. Is any other comments on this? But thanks for all the comments you had. I learned a lot this week on that, so that's good. So the second thing, let me take a look. David, you sent me some nice stuff I saw that I wanted to look at. This thing. Make it bigger.
Yep. Yeah, I mainly took your list rather than starting at the C4 diagram. I just took your list and tried to interpret it for the 11 lines that you had in your matrix. I tried to break that out just into the source and destination. And in some cases, you have lines between boxes, and that includes both a request and a response. So I broke those out separately, so you'd have an additional column for the command and the response instead of having additional rows between the same boxes if they refer to the same interaction. And I may not have interpreted any of these correctly, but this was my attempt to try to.
That sounds right. Now, what is the difference between OC2 response and OC2 notification? What do those two columns mean?
So when you have a request response pair, they're linked together. You send a request, you get an answer back. That's typically what you do with HTTP. A notification is an unsolicited message. Like a log, a syslog message. There's no request that comes with that. It's just event driven.
Or it's a very delayed request to it. So you might say scan files and get a response back saying, okay, I will. And then a minute later, you get a notification saying, hey guys, here's the answer from a minute ago, right, Dave? That counts too, right?
Yes, and that's the example on lines 3 and 4. If you start collection, then it may take a minute or 5 minutes to finish the collection. And so your first one, you would initiate the command, you'd get a response back where the status says got it, working on it, and then 5 minutes later you get back the answer in the notification, and the notification could contain the results that you were asking for. So yes, Duncan, that's correct.
That makes sense. Okay, now I get it. Okay, so kind of an asynchronous response to a request ends up being a notification.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, that helps. Thank you.
One question, I sort of don't want to open a can of worms, but I do want to see if it got resolved. So does the OCA ontology have the word sim, SOAR, tip, all these other things in it? Or do we just go to functions? I do think we should operate at the functional level, but if OCA ontology has the concept of, a sim consists of these 6 functions or whatever, then I guess it's good to know that.
Yeah,
Or
it's
should
a
we stay away from those words?
It's a system, so we can put it in the ontology as cataloged as a system. And so what's kind of hard, I mean, I guess we could logically do it, have a system. Yeah, systems perform a functions, systems participate in activities. We can do that. So when you say from to OC activity, can you blow that up a little bit here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Let me see if I can.
Does that help?
yeah, my intent was
That's
to
fine.
try to take Russ's input and interpret what he had squeezed into one column just into multiple columns. So yeah, if you were sending a request or command from a sim, to an endpoint, that's why I tried to break it out there. So I think I parsed his words correctly there.
Yeah.
But Duncan's question on the ontology of whether there is a sim box in the ontology, I added this actuator column, because that was my contribution to the knowledge here. I think the fact that a sim could do EDR functions, it could do antivirus functions, it could do other things, and so that actuator column is the profiles that we have thought of so far. We may need additional profiles. Of course, we don't have posture attribute collection or.
So that's what a actuator profile is a type of function that it does?
Yes.
Or function it performs, the bearer of a function. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the way we would articulate in the ontology is that a system, the SIEM system is the bearer of a antivirus detection function. It realizes that function through a process of blocking that it performs on a so I guess it would perform participate in a blocking action of a malware that would be trying to be written to an endpoint device. So that's in a logical format. The machine can understand what that process is and who's doing it, what their function is in order to do it. So that's how we would kind of map all that out. Hopefully that made some sense.
Yeah. And again, since I was taking Russ's matrix and as input, I tried to make a sentence like that. The use case or the use story is just like you said it. A SIM system would do this. It would tell an endpoint to block a file, and the OpenC2 command to block files is defined in the antivirus actuator profile.
Okay, yeah, so that would be a little bit different. But we could, so that, okay, so it's sending a command to the endpoint to perform an act, which
Right.
is, you know, do not allow this file to be written. And okay, yeah, so we could map that. It's a little bit different than what I said, but we could just as easily map that out too. So
Yeah,
that's realizing antivirus. So that's realizing its function of antivirus protection or identification protection or something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in IACD speak, the SIM or SOAR would be the decision-making box that decides you need to block or do whatever contains
Right.
the ones we're talking about. And the actual act of doing it, the decision maker, the SIM or the SOAR says, hey, go do this. The thing that says go do this is the OC2 command. And the way we've lumped for understanding the receiving of these commands, the actuators, the things that are actually doing the function, is why we decided on this sort of functional, this name actuator profile is to say, hey, box, whatever you are, tell us what you can do. If you can do this, you're this kind of actuator. If you can do that, you're this other kind of actuator. You're
Yeah.
allowed to be
So
more
so
than
we'll,
one kind of actuator.
yeah, and so we would create, so what you would be able to do then at that point, you'd be able to instantiate or create an instance of an event or an activity, and that activity is a file blocking of this particular malware. And the participants, you would have several participants in that event, and you could link them all to that event, and space and time. Space isn't as important here, but time certainly is. And so you could see how everything is related logically to that activity via the ontology.
Yeah. And actually, I'd argue space is important too, because you have sometimes the options of doing it more than one place, and you don't always use all of them.
Well, yeah. So they would be.
The
So
decision
yeah. So
maker,
space.
SOAR might say do all the perimeters, or it might just say do everything everywhere, or it might say do every endpoint or only the Windows ones or whatever.
Right, and so the only way to do that effectively, to reel in or to bring in space and time, is to link space and time to that action that occurs, the specific action at that time. So blocking file is a type of activity that would happen. So then we would create an instance of that happening, which we would say these are participants in it. That's when they do it. That's where it's done, and how it's done. And so everything is kind of centered around that specific action occurring. So that's the only way that you can map in all your data effectively in a way that you can logically link all the data together, is around that, what I'll call it an object of an activity or an event object that relates to file blocking. I can whiteboard or graph it out sometime if that's helpful, but.
Oh, no, it makes perfect sense that you've got a type of command that you support, and you've got instances of commands that are actually sent to your endpoints.
Yeah,
So,
as part of that, and when it's specifically done in space and time, we call it an instance of the activity, and then we can link everything to that.
right. So the two column here, there were two destinations. If you've got a malware protect scanner, that's a device management system that manages a bunch of endpoints. Or you've got the endpoints themselves. If you've got a scanner agent running on your workstation, then that would also be an antivirus recipient. So you could send it to the manager or to the device or to both, depending on how your enterprise is set up.
Yep, that's right. So one question I had, David, is I saw you took number 2 and made a separate actuator profile out of it. I was wondering what drove you to that. Why couldn't it just be under the EDR actuator?
I'm not. I started because we've got a placeholder for an antivirus profile.
Oh, I see.
It doesn't have anything in it now, but the reason that I put it there is because I wasn't sure that EDR actually performs antivirus functions. If it typically does, then yeah, they could be merged.
Well, but then that gets back into the we're making an assumption. It might be once we sort of build up the EDR actuator, we decide that, nah, this really is 2 functions or 6 functions or 9 functions, whatever. And the reason, my opinion of what will eventually drive where we want the boundaries of how much stuff we lump together is to make as much as possible for the end purchaser of security gear to do it in a vendor agnostic way, so that there are, so that I can have, we at least, in my mind, allow for the possibility that the antivirus could be different from the EDR. If that's never going to be the case, no, it's always going to be the case that, and the case of, hey, when all I have is antivirus, I don't have a fancy EDR, it's still a quote type of EDR with all the other options disabled. If we go that route, that's fine. But the reason for the sort of more granular functional definition is to allow you to pick the McAfee active antivirus, but the IBM EDR or whatever. And if that's just not a possibility for a customer, then we don't need to worry about it. But we're not smart enough yet to know where to draw those boundaries. We got into these fights on firewalls in the early days of all this stuff. It's all said and done, firewalls have lots of functions beyond firewall.
Yes. Yes. Yes,
So we said that, well, let's just make them different functions. And if they all happen to be lumped in one box, that's fine. A box can have more than one function. It's allowed to be more than one type of actuator.
Right, and I guess the converse is true from what I'm learning about OpenC2 is whatever you've listed out in actuator, I don't have to implement all of them into the box that I'm talking about. I just tell you which ones I do.
Correct. And that's
Yeah.
where it's sort of trying to get the sweet spot between those two is where
gotcha.
we're still, we haven't done it enough to know. We don't have enough of it.
Yeah, it'll be arbitrary no matter what we do anyway. That's good. I get you. Okay, so that was the motivation you had. You were guys thinking down the AV line anyway, so you thought that this is appropriate for that.
We had an AV, somebody recommended AV like 4 years ago. No one's done anything on it since then, but we at least had an empty one for a while.
Okay.
EDR hadn't even existed in the vocabulary yet. Now it's coming, maybe
That's right.
assumes it, maybe it doesn't. We need to figure that out.
I got you.
But in this particular case for OCA, we can concretely decide. We can decide, no, we want to just use EDR, and then we collapse the 2 columns or whatever.
Right. Okay. No, I was just curious. You made that distinction. There must, and there had to be a reason. So I just wanted to ask what it was.
Well, and packet filtering is going to be another example in that exact same. Is it the EDR function that does packet filtering, and we reuse sort of the same commands, or do we just say, no, this particular thing you guys call EDR always has a packet filter actuator in it, and we just use the packet filter actuator profiles we already have. So, so does one box end up being 6 profiles, or do we just make a new profile that contains all 6 of them? And the answer there is, it depends on how people really build them and sell them moving forward. If it makes it too hard to do it in, Azure, IBM, and McAfee or whatever, then we didn't lump them together right. We need to do it in some way that is the simplest way for the largest number of cases. We just don't know how to do it yet.
Okay. No, makes sense. Because I did have that quandary when I was looking at some of these other stuff of, whether or not it was an existing actuator thing or a new one. But I see where your dilemma is, and I get it. It'll be a balance.
We don't want to end up with an Azure actuator and a Google actuator and a McAfee actuator.
That defeats the purpose.
Want to be vendor agnostic, which sort of leans towards the littler function, but then it gets sort of messy because you got this one does 17 of the 19, and this other one does a different 18 of the 19, and why do you need 19 to do that?
That's true. That's true. But it seems like you have the flexibility either way, because I don't have to implement everything in the actuator. So you got either way. Okay.
So
you got
I wasn't even considering an overlap between antivirus and EDR, but the other email I sent out was overlap between antivirus and intrusion prevention. Because way back when I actually did network work, they had host intrusion detection systems and network intrusion detection, and then that evolved into intrusion prevention. So I don't know much about what IDSs do, but that was the question in my mind, was what was the boundary between just doing antivirus and doing intrusion prevention. So that was the motivation for the other email.
Right, and that was a good one. I did pass that on to Ian and Forrest for the consideration in our model.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
the same
that's
sort of question could apply between antivirus and EDR. It just didn't even occur to me that that was possible. So,
but I do think your intrusion prevention is more of a broader topic than AV is, I think.
Yeah, but yeah, I think intrusion prevention is going to end up being more than one actuator, but we don't, particularly if you include the prevention part. It's just,
Yeah.
if at a minimum, it's probably detection, and then prevention is really just the other filters. But again, I think we need more use cases and decide where we want to put the functional boundaries.
I agree.
There are some major differences there between a host-based intrusion prevention system and a network-based one as well.
Absolutely.
Right. And does the host-based one, again, is it just lumped in EDR or is it its own thing?
Doesn't have to be EDR.
So probably it's its own thing.
I'm shrugging right now, but my video is off.
We can't see that, Andrew. But no, it's more. I think it's more than hosting. I think it's a capability that can be carried out in a few places. But it does happen.
So it's like AV in that, but some of its functionality is also in EDR when you have EDR, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right. And as Andrew said, some of it's network layered stuff. Some of it's not stuff. Right. Some of it's advanced technology, 0-day stuff. Some of it's behavioral stuff.
But even that that's another one we've wrestled with from the actuator viewpoint. We only care how it's done if it matters how you command and control it. In other words, you say block IP.
Yeah.
If the only thing I have to tell you is the IP number, I sort of don't care how you do it.
Exactly. I got you. That makes sense.
IPS and IPS, when you get into the behavioral versus the signature and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It's not, no one's done enough work yet on the OpenC2 side to say whether they're different or the same. You really tell them to do something different. Well, you got to set up different sort of initial configuration info, but to actually tell them to do something different, we don't have enough experience with.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would, what my feeling is, Duncan, that figuring out if it's intrusion is different based on which type of intrusion we're looking for, but the actions are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
I think.
And then even for the detection part, do you tell it something different to detect it or no? You just tell it go detect it and it tells you this one did it by detecting behavioral stuff. This other one did it by detecting signatures, but I didn't actually tell it to do anything different.
Right, and that's how we will, when we get into that, is how we parse up just like the PC, the pasture collection system, that they've got a bunch of different things that get done. Some of them get done uniquely, like in a behavioral system versus known IP issues, and but still at the end of the day, it comes down to a common, it's bad or it's not bad, and we're going to do something consistent with it. So on one end of it, there's a different policy that you're looking for, a different type of information pattern you're going to look for. On the other hand, it's consistent actions you'll take dealing with the fact that you've discovered there's an intrusion, I think. Oh, that's more detail. Okay, so we'll skip 3 and 4 because I don't want to get into the pace stuff. And as I said, I'm leaving that intentionally. As IBM said, we leave it intentionally left blank. We will, we'll let the pace guys work through these. I do know there are subtle differences. You had asked here on number 10 is assess endpoint posture different than initiate? And the answer to that is yes. There's subtleties between the two, but again, it's more pace knowledge. And at this point, I'm not a really pace knowledgeable guy that they could tell you what the differences are, but there are different use cases for those two.
So there's a PACE meeting where that stuff will get discussed?
Yeah, they actually have a project now in OCA, and Adam and the team run a PACE project every once in a while. I've seen reports from them. David, I think, David Lehmeyer, are you involved a little bit with that?
A little bit, yeah. So
yeah.
He's being modest. Yes, we're heavily involved with that.
He's probably running the whole thing.
So Mike Rosa has a Monday 1 p.m. Eastern weekly PACE status call, and Duncan, I believe he's forwarded you an invite for that.
I will go try and find it. All right. but that's under the OCA PACE
Yes.
project auspices. And then
Yes.
that would feed up information to this wider architecture.
That's the intention. Yes. And this group will feed over to the Open C2 once we figure out what it is we're asking for. But that's the idea.
And then do we also do the reverse? Do we like the issue you raised earlier of, hey, you could do this query stuff with sticks, or you could do this query stuff with OpenC2. That's actually an architectural issue that, I don't know, PACE might have a different answer than OpenC2 has, that is a different answer than Sticks Shifter has, that this would be sort of, well, is it okay to be different, or should we just pick one and so in this use case use this one, but that use case, that there's probably a back and forth also. Like, I mean,
Yep.
I don't think this particular one will end up this way, but you might say, no, OpenC2, you shouldn't have query anymore. You don't need it. We'll always use sticks. And we'd say,
Right.
yeah, you don't need it for OCA applications. Maybe we need it for a different one. But I do worry, we have on the query one in particular, we have worried since the beginning of, and also on the notification column that's still on this chart. Both of those have been sort of sore points since the beginning on, we don't want to step on other people's toes. We don't want to do stuff somebody already has something to do with. We don't want to reinvent syslog, use syslog. But if there's use cases where, yeah, but this is the only interface to the device, well, okay, well, you should use OpenC2.
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, we can now. Yes.
Hey, quick point to what Duncan is just saying. I actually joined the CTITC meeting today, and there was a brief discussion about doing some level of lightning talk or joint discussion between CTI, Cacao, OpenC2, what's the other one right now, TAC, on how we all fit together again. Having, I think we've had those conversations in the past, these different subcommittees, but it's been a while.
Yeah,
I should say TCs.
And this and PACE and OCA should participate as well if possible.
Yeah, so I told him I told him I just became a co-chair, but I said at least I know I can only say as an individual at this point that I'd be happy to join those conversations from an OpenC2 side. But I assume the rest of the OpenC2 TC might be interested as well. So I was going to bring that up at our next meeting. But I want to note it here just in case, though. So when I do hear more from that, it was Jane Ginn and obviously the CTI TC co-chairs and a couple others who noted interest in that. So as I hear more, I'll be sure to share.
It's a great idea. That's a great idea. So Duncan, back to your point on sticks. I think, the intention I had there is, yes, certainly could be two-way dialogue. We'd introduce it and as I said, as the intention is to bring some of the OCA requests to the OpenC2 group. And in there, we'll talk about the query and how we're using it with sticks, and then we can debate what you want to do with it.
Yeah, because I guess architecturally, I usually think of the big smart boxes that have sticks anyway. You should do the stick stuff using sticks. The
Right.
old dumb boxes that the only thing you got connected to it is this, tenuous, OC2 command and control link. Well, those we need to do more in the OC2 space than is strictly speaking command and control. I mean, query isn't exactly command and control. Yes, in a sense, it's a command, but it's not what you typically think of as a command.
Right.
So again, we don't want to, we want to make all this stuff work in the optimal number of circumstances. So if you don't have OpenC2 and you do have sticks, do everything with sticks. If you only have OpenC2, do everything with OpenC2. When you got both, which is the case we're sort of discussing, well, then let's be logical and do the command stuff with OpenC2 and the intelligence stuff with sticks and figure it out.
Yeah, whatever makes sense. I think it would be nice to. I mean, when I looked at the spec for OpenC2, I guess you do lay out the format of the data, and I think you also have another spec on the transmission of that data. I don't know if it's appropriate to align sticks with that, and if you want to use sticks to do some of the query stuff, then fine. If not, you can use something else. I don't know.
Well, that does bring up another excellent point of architectural level consideration. You mentioned the transport. So OpenC2 does have different transport mechanisms.
Yeah, that's right.
Currently specified, and we have an empty specification for something called OpenDXL. So I would assume it would be of great interest to this community to sort of help out with getting the OpenC2 over OpenDXL, because that is sort of your architecture. It's not your only architecture. You can allow other ones, and again, OpenC2 supports the other ones. But that's an area where we probably need to step up the effort, and help from this side would help in getting that, because the architecture doesn't work if it doesn't hang together.
Yeah, and as you know, Mark and Chris are the experts in McAfee on that stuff. Yeah, they've offered to help. I don't know if they have, but they'd be the right folks. But certainly agree. It is one of our primary.
Right now, the draft spec has 0 words in it.
That's easy to review, Duncan.
Not actually, because it is an OASIS document, so it has boilerplate only words.
Boilerplate, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
You can read the whole thing and at the end go, but wait, it never actually said
said anything. You haven't said anything. I love it.
Obviously, the OpenC2 side is interested, and there are some people that are on this call and wear both hats that are interested.
Yeah.
But
right.
if the rest of the OCA community could help a little bit there, that would be greatly appreciated.
Gotcha.
And then threatened in the past to just, okay, I'll write the spec and I'll write in a way that I can guarantee won't work. And then maybe people will start helping. But
you get comments, yeah. That's right.
I have not carried through that threat.
That approach will work sometimes. I've done it. Yeah. So row 11 here, Dave, you tickled something that, I tried to get away from. I do know we're going to need other profiles. I was going to kind of look at the sim SOAR tip side, I always think of them as more the driving applications of these things. I think we will need a bunch of actuators for representing the capabilities and things they do. I agree. Maybe a ticketing is one. I know playbooks and run books, and I don't know how does Cacao have any relationship with OpenC2 at all today? I don't think so.
Well, Cacao is a playbook.
Right.
It has various steps it can take in the playbook. The steps can be OpenC2 commands. They can be other things as well. You tell humans to do things. We don't have a tell human to do thing OpenC2 command. But they could be Python. They can be some other stuff in Cacao. But one of the choices for what to put for your actions in a playbook is to send OpenC2 commands. And the sort of hope from the OpenC2 side is that people would try to be vendor agnostic and use OpenC2, as opposed to, if you wanted to, you could also put Cisco commands in, and you could put, IBM commands in, and you can put McAfee commands in. The preference from the user community would generally be, but if you did it using OpenC2 commands, it's vendor agnostic, and then it works even if you have a different vendor. But there's chicken and egg issues here too. So we still need to work there. I do know some of the OpenC2 members are doing work in that area. The sort of, I'll call it sister project to the PACE project, the Jacob project over in Europe, both of which are international. This is international, that's international. Neither one is US and Europe. However, all said and done, this meeting's pretty US centric, and their meetings are pretty European centric, but they're basically doing the same thing. They're saying, how do you come up with theirs is a much broader use case they're trying to address, but the sort of equivalent to the PACE use case is a subset of it. And the people that are really doing most of the work there are doing it with Cacao playbooks that happen to be full of OpenC2 commands, at least as near as I can.
Okay. Great. Okay. So what I'm going to do, David, on number 11, I'm going to parse this one out and start a separate table. I do know between, and I'll probably need Andrew some of your help, but between tips, SOAR, and SIM, I haven't got to that yet, but there are a bunch of functionality things that communication things we do across them that probably we are going to start creating some profiles for the those kind of actions, but I haven't got there yet. I was just trying to stay to the end point on this discussion. Figured it was enough of a subject.
To be clear, are they, well, like open incident case is an actual action, so I agree on that one, but this would be one I'd say take care to not wander into stick space, because if you're just passing intelligence between the two machines so the other machine can do the decision making, we don't need to invent OpenC2 commands for things that are already occurring organically in sticks.
No, gotcha. So some of these, gathering threat intelligence from a tip or dispersing tip information through these things is an example of some things that go back and forth. And the sim, there's a lot of automated orchestration that happens to drive a ticket, open up a ticket, for example, is the response when you're reading here. But there's a lot of other actions that happen between the sim and the SOAR that aren't represented here yet, but they could be. And they are just right now proprietary kind of things that go back and forth. So we could probably look at that as an example. But it won't be sticks related. It'll be more communications that
Yeah,
happen.
replacing proprietary stuff with vendor agnostic is the sweet spot we want to
Yes,
do everything in this project.
exactly. And that's what we're going to look at. There's a lot of actions because the good thing about, and I'm sure Andrew has this issue as well as I do, is that I've got so many different integrations to show examples of my sim integrating with all the other sims that I could probably look through it and see some of the examples of common things I keep doing between these two things that maybe if we had an open one, it wouldn't be proprietary every time.
Right.
That kind of thing. Okay, David, this was extremely helpful. Thanks for pulling this together. I'll kind of put this together with mine. Maybe I'll break this out. I'll break this out like you did on I like what you did here with the actuators and then the command response and notifications. This is cool. So thanks for the improvement of my table. I appreciate it.
I want to ask Ian to map some of this out using ontology too. So thanks. Some of these are a little bit more bite-sized than the big, the monster graphic that we did. So Ian could start with this.
Yeah, and I did send Ian one of the conversations David was having me on ontology that he already grabbed and got it. So that's good. I passed it over to him.
And we have 3 minutes left. And Forrest, you put something in the chat that I don't know if you want to grab.
Yeah, what would you like to talk about, Forrest?
Yeah, so I guess for both Russ and Duncan. So on Monday you have scheduled the zero trust meeting right after the ontology
Right
meeting.
after your meeting. That's right. Yep, that's right.
So I think the ontology meeting. I think we're supposed to have someone from UCO join us. We haven't got a confirmation, or has anybody seen a confirmation from that gentleman yet?
No.
The developer of the UCO. Okay. I have a conflict with another meeting it's not gonna get out until 3:15 to put a buffer. What I would like to do is shift to 3:30. I'm wondering if we could just shift the both of them 30 minutes. Could we do that? Just in case we can't get that UCO person, because I really want to listen to what they have to say. So I'd like to be at the meeting on Monday.
Okay. So meet with the 4:30 on Monday for the zero trust.
Yeah, if other people don't mind. If anybody here was supposed to be in that, if that'll work. Okay.
Well, I'll give it a shot anyway.
As long as you get it to everybody who's going so that everybody shows up at the right time. I'll show up at whatever time you tell me to, as long as you tell me more than 5 minutes before.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So Ian will shift the first one, and if you could shift the second one, appreciate it.
I'll shift the second one. Yeah, I'll move it around. Not a problem. I can do that. All right. Any other comments? We got 1 minute left. I'm getting good on timing on these things. Thanks again for everybody's input. I do appreciate it. I did get a lot of good feedback, both educating me and also helping me understand a little better how OpenC2 works. And I think we're getting a step closer here. Once we've got it complete for the endpoint, I'm going to redraw the diagrams to be aligned with the actions targets thing here. I'll probably put the action targets in the flows to be a little more detailed. So I'll try and create a diagram that more aligns with what we're talking about here, because I haven't touched that diagram in a while. And then I'll go through the next set of actions that I didn't put out here, which were for some of the flows that I didn't capture between the, as I said, threat intelligence, SIM, and SOAR. I'll put another table together for that.
All right. And Dave, Mike, I suggest we put on our Wednesday OpenC2 agenda discussing the yellow circles of that other chart and seeing what we need to update.
It's a good idea.
Works for me.
Just last comment for the PACE meetings, we are also getting use cases from McAfee, and they were based on sequence diagrams. So that sort of relates to your C4 chart. So all of the boxes on those sequence diagrams are listed.
Yeah, I did remember seeing that. I got to go back and look at it. Yeah, you put that in the PACE repository, I think. I thought we did that. Okay, everybody, thanks for attending for the good discussion. Appreciate your helping me along. I think we're making progress on mapping into the OpenC2 environment, so we can get down to commands and definitions of commands. That'll take a step closer to bringing this stuff together. So thanks everybody for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you.